I was standing in the hallway when it happened. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I had lived in for 4 long weeks. But this quiet was different. This time, I could hear it. I could hear the soft hum of the ceiling fan. I could hear the ticking clock on the wall. I could even hear my own breathing, slow and careful, like I was afraid the sound might give me away. Then I heard his voice. Before we continue, please comment where you are watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more interesting revenge stories. It means a lot to us. My husband was in the living room, his back to the hallway, his phone pressed to his ear. He didn't know I was there. He didn't know I could hear again. To him, I was still the deaf wife who lived in silence. He laughed. It was not a loud laugh. It was low and relaxed. The kind of laugh people make when they feel safe telling the truth. "She's sitting right here," he said into the phone. "Don't worry, she can't hear a thing." My heart dropped so fast, it felt like my body forgot how to stand. I pressed my hand against the wall to steady myself. My legs felt weak, like they might fold under me at any moment. I wanted to step back. I wanted to walk away. But my feet would not move. On the other end of the phone was his mother. I couldn't hear her voice clearly, but I didn't need to. I could tell what she was saying by the way his face changed. He sighed, shaking his head. "I know, Mama," he said. "I didn't sign up for this. A wife who can't hear, can't help properly, can't even notice what's going on around her." Each word hit me like a slap. My chest tightened. I felt a sharp pain there, like something was tearing open slowly. I held my breath, afraid that if I made even the smallest sound, he would turn around. He leaned back on the couch, completely relaxed. "She's become extra work," he continued. "Everything is on me now. Talking for her, explaining things, repeating myself all the time. It's exhausting." Exhausting. That word echoed in my head. This was the same man who had held my hands in the hospital and promised me we would get through this together. The same man who had looked into my eyes and told me I was not a burden. I felt my eyes burn, but no tears fell. I was too shocked to cry. He lowered his voice even more, smiling like he was sharing a secret. "If I'm being honest," he said, "sometimes I wish this never happened to me." To him, not to me. I felt my knees tremble. My mouth opened slightly. But no sound came out. My mind screamed at me to step forward, to let him know I could hear every cruel word. But my body refused to obey. On the phone, his mother must have said something that amused him, because he chuckled again. "You're right," he said. "At least now she can't argue back." That was when my heart truly broke. I felt something inside me go quiet, deeper than deafness. It was the sound of trust shattering. I took a slow step back, then another, careful not to let the floor creak. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to press them against my stomach. I moved into the bedroom and closed the door gently, like I was the one hiding a secret. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall. I could still hear him talking in the living room. His voice floated through the door, clear and sharp. Each word reminded me that my silence had given him freedom. Freedom to say what he truly felt. Just a few hours earlier, everything had been different. That morning, I had been standing in the kitchen, washing dishes, lost in my thoughts. 4 weeks of silence had taught me how to live without sound. I had learned to read lips, to watch faces closely, to feel vibrations instead of hearing noise. Then the spoon slipped from my hand. It hit the floor, and I heard it. The sound was faint, but real. A small metal clink that froze me in place. My heart began to race. I held my breath, wondering if my mind was playing tricks on me. I dropped another spoon. This time, the sound was clearer. I sank into a chair, my hands shaking, tears filling my eyes. The world was coming back to me, slowly, gently, like it was afraid to scare me away. I didn't tell anyone, not my husband, not my sister, not even the doctor. A strange fear held my tongue. Part of me wanted to surprise them. Another part wanted to be sure. But deep down, I think I wanted to listen. And now I knew why. Back in the bedroom, I lay down and pulled the blanket over myself, even though it was still early. My body felt heavy, like I had carried something too big for too long. I thought about the 4 weeks of silence, the way people talked around me instead of to me, the way my mother-in-law spoke loudly, not kindly, as if volume could replace respect, the way my husband's patience slowly faded. I had blamed myself for all of it. Now I understood. A soft knock came at the bedroom door. I heard it clearly. "Are you okay?" my husband asked gently, pushing the door open. I turned my face toward him and forced myself to act. I pointed to my ears and shook my head slightly, pretending I didn't hear. He smiled with relief. "Just checking on you," he said, his lips forming words I already knew. "Rest." He closed the door behind him. I stared at the ceiling, my eyes wide open. The house was full of sound now. Every little noise felt louder than it should be. But the loudest sound of all was his voice in my head, repeating the words he thought I would never hear. A wife who can't hear. Extra work. At least she can't argue back. I pressed my hand to my chest, feeling my heart beat fast and strong. I was not weak, I was not invisible, and I was not deaf anymore. But for now, I would stay silent. Not because I was powerless, but because I was listening. The day I lost my hearing did not begin with fear. It began like any other morning. I woke up early, before the sun fully rose. The room felt normal. The light coming through the window was soft and pale. I stretched my arms and turned to look at my husband sleeping beside me. His chest rose and fell slowly. At that moment, I felt safe. I got out of bed and went to the kitchen. I remember putting water on the stove. I remember cutting bread. Everything looked the same, but something felt off. When the kettle should have started to whistle, it didn't. At least, I thought it didn't. I stood there for a long time, staring at it, waiting. The silence felt thick, like cotton stuffed into my ears. I tapped the kettle with a spoon. Nothing. A strange fear crept into my stomach. I clapped my hands. Still nothing. My heart began to pound. I ran back to the bedroom and shook my husband awake. He spoke to me, his mouth moving fast, his face full of worry. But I could not hear him, not even a little. I touched my ears and shook my head. Panic filled his eyes. That was the start. The hospital was bright and cold. I remember the doctor's face, serious but calm. I remember reading his lips as he explained that sudden hearing loss could happen after an illness or stress. Sometimes it came back, sometimes it didn't. Those words changed my life. When we returned home, the world became quiet in a way I had never known. No cars, no voices, no footsteps, just silence that followed me everywhere. At first, my husband tried. He spoke slowly. He looked straight at me so I could read his lips. He held my hands when I cried at night. He promised me that I was not alone. His mother came to visit the second week. She stood very close to my face and spoke loudly, as if I were far away instead of unable to hear. "You must be strong," she said, her mouth wide as she spoke. "Life does not stop because of this." I nodded politely, though her eyes showed no warmth. She did not touch me. She did not hug me. She spoke to my husband more than she spoke to me. At first, I told myself I was imagining things. Days passed, then weeks. Living without sound taught me new habits. I learned to watch shadows under doors so I would know when someone was coming. I learned to feel vibrations through the floor. I learned to read faces carefully because smiles did not always mean kindness. I also learned how people change when they think you cannot hear. My husband began to sigh more often. His shoulders carried a tired weight. When I asked him to repeat himself, he did, but slower each time, like patience was something he was running out of. Sometimes he spoke to me while looking at his phone, not at my face. I had to tap his arm to remind him. At night, I lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. I could feel him turn away from me, his back facing mine. Silence filled the space between us. His mother visited often. She rearranged my kitchen without asking. She spoke about me while standing right beside me, talking to my husband as if I were not there. "She needs to adjust," she said once, her mouth sharp. "You can't keep changing your life for her." I saw my husband nod. That nod stayed with me. I tried not to let it hurt. I reminded myself that this was hard for him too. I reminded myself that love meant patience. But patience, I learned, can become loneliness when it is one-sided. My sister was different. When she visited, she sat close to me. She looked into my eyes. She held my hands and smiled gently. She wrote notes for me when words were too fast. She noticed the way I flinched when voices were raised, even though I could not hear them. She noticed the way I watched my husband's face carefully. One evening, she pulled me aside and wrote on her phone, "Are you okay?" I smiled and nodded. It was easier to pretend. As the 4th week approached, something inside me grew tired. Not just my body, but my heart. I felt like I was shrinking, becoming smaller in my own home. Then came the doctor's appointment. My husband came with me, sitting beside me in the small room. The doctor spoke slowly, clearly, making sure I could read his lips. He explained that sometimes hearing returns suddenly, without warning, without signs. I felt a small spark of hope. That same evening, I stood in the kitchen again. The sun was setting. The house was calm. My husband was in the living room, talking on the phone. I could see his mouth moving from where I stood. I was washing dishes when the spoon slipped. It hit the floor, and I heard it. At first, I froze. The sound was soft but real. My heart raced. I held my breath. I waited. I tapped the plate against the sink. There it was again. Sound. I covered my mouth to stop myself from crying out. Tears filled my eyes as I leaned against the counter. The world was coming back, one sound at a time. I could hear my breathing. I could hear water running. I could hear my husband's voice in the other room, low and distant. I did not tell him. I don't know why. Maybe fear, maybe instinct. Maybe something inside me knew that silence had shown me things I wasn't ready to lose yet, so I stayed quiet. I pretended nothing had changed. That night, lying in bed, I listened to my husband breathe. I listened to the house settle. I listened to everything I had missed for weeks, and I wondered what else I had been missing. The next day, I watched more closely. I listened more carefully. I noticed how my husband spoke differently when he thought I could not hear. I noticed how his mother's words were sharper, freer. Silence had protected their secrets. And now that I could hear again, I understood that the quiet weeks were not just about my ears. They were about truth. I was not ready to face it yet, so I stayed silent. And I listened. The hardest part about hearing again was pretending I couldn't. At first, I thought it would be easy. I told myself it was just for a short time, just until I felt sure, just until I understood what was really happening around me. But days passed, and I was still silent. Every morning, I woke up before my husband. I lay still, listening to the quiet sounds of the house, the fan turning slowly, a bird calling outside the window, the soft sound of his breathing beside me. These sounds felt precious, like something I had lost and found again. When he woke up, I slipped back into my role. I watched his lips. I nodded at the right times. I pointed to my ears and smiled sadly when he spoke too fast. He never guessed. That truth scared me more than anything. During breakfast, he talked on the phone more often now. He no longer stepped outside to take calls. He sat right there at the table, believing I was locked away in silence. I stirred my tea slowly, listening. "I'm trying my best," he said one morning, his voice low. "But it's not easy." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. "Yes, I know," he replied. "Everything has changed. Everything." He ended the call and looked at me. He smiled, soft and practiced, like someone putting on a familiar mask. I smiled back. Inside, something twisted. As the days went on, I started hearing more than just words. I heard tone. I heard impatience. I heard things people never say out loud when they think you can hear them. My mother-in-law came by in the afternoons. She never knocked softly. She slammed the door as if to announce her presence. She spoke freely now. "She's too quiet," she said once, standing in the kitchen with my husband while I washed vegetables. "It's like she's not even here." I was right there. "She used to talk so much," she continued. "Now look at her, always watching, always waiting." I kept my head down. My hands shook slightly, but I didn't stop what I was doing. "She's lucky she has you," his mother added. "Not every man would stay." I waited. I waited for him to defend me. He didn't. He just nodded. That nod felt heavier than any word. At night, I replayed these moments in my head. I listened to the house settle into sleep. I listened to my husband turn away from me in bed, the space between us growing wider. I wondered when exactly love had started to feel like duty. One afternoon, my sister visited. She brought fruit and bread, placing them gently on the table. She sat close to me, her eyes searching my face. She spoke slowly so I could read her lips. "You look tired." I nodded. She hesitated, then reached for my hand. Her touch was warm, grounding. She spoke again. "Are they being kind to you?" I swallowed and forced a small smile. She didn't look convinced. When my husband left the room to take a call, my sister leaned closer. She lowered her voice, even though she believed I couldn't hear. "I don't like the way they talk about you," she whispered. My heart skipped. I looked at her, surprised. She sighed. "They forget you're still here. You're still you." I squeezed her hand tightly. She smiled sadly. "If you ever need me, just tell me." That night, I cried silently into my pillow. Not because I was weak, but because someone had finally seen me. The next day, I heard something that changed the way I looked at myself. My husband was in the living room with his mother. I was in the bedroom, folding clothes. The door was slightly open. "She doesn't even notice anymore," his mother said. "You could say anything." I held my breath. "She notices," my husband replied, though his voice lacked strength. His mother scoffed. "She can't hear, that's the point." There was a pause. "I never thought my life would turn out like this," my husband said quietly. "I had plans." Plans. I leaned against the wall, my chest tight. "So did I whispered to myself. They talked about trips they couldn't take, about money, about effort, about how tiring it was to explain things twice. Not once did they talk about how I felt. That night, I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. I looked thinner. My eyes looked older. But there was something else there too. Awareness. Silence had stripped everything down. It had shown me the truth without noise, without excuses. I began to understand that my deafness had not changed who I was. It had revealed who they were. Still, I stayed quiet. Not because I was afraid to speak, but because I was preparing myself. Each day, I listened carefully. I gathered moments, not to use as weapons, but as clarity. I wanted to be sure. I wanted to face the truth without doubt. One evening, my husband sat beside me on the couch. He put his arm around my shoulders. His touch felt distant, like he was doing what he thought he should. "You okay?" he asked, speaking slowly. I nodded. He smiled. "Good." That was all. I leaned my head against his chest and listened to his heartbeat. It was steady, normal. Mine was not. I realized then that hearing had given me something greater than sound. It had given me choice. I could stay silent forever, or I could speak when the time was right. And when I finally spoke, it would not be in anger. It would be in truth. For now, I stayed quiet. And I listened. Silence can feel powerful at first. It gives you space. It gives you time. It gives you distance from pain while you try to understand it. But after a while, silence becomes heavy. It sits on your chest when you wake up. It follows you through the day. It presses against your thoughts until you feel like you might break if you don't let something out. By the start of the 5th week, that was how silence felt to me. I woke up one morning before dawn, my eyes already open, my body already tense. I could hear the rain tapping softly against the window. It was a gentle sound, calm and steady, but it made my chest ache. I wondered how many mornings I had missed sounds like this. How many moments had passed without me knowing. My husband slept beside me, turned away as usual. I listened to his breathing and tried to remember when he used to pull me close at night. I tried to remember when his touch felt warm instead of distant. I got out of bed quietly and went to the kitchen. The house felt different now that I could hear again. Every sound seemed louder, sharper. The refrigerator hummed. The floor creaked under my feet. Even the ticking clock felt like it was counting something important down. I made tea and sat at the table, holding the warm cup in my hands. I didn't drink it. I just sat there and listened. When my husband came into the kitchen later, he looked surprised to see me awake. "You're up early," he said, speaking slowly so I could read his lips. I nodded and forced a small smile. He poured himself coffee and checked his phone. I watched his face change as he read messages. His eyebrows tightened. His jaw clenched slightly. I wondered who he was talking to so early. His mother came later that day. I heard her car before she even knocked. The sound of tires on gravel made my stomach tighten. I stood in the living room, pretending to arrange things that were already neat. She entered the house like she always did, without waiting for an answer. "There you are," she said loudly, smiling in a way that didn't reach her eyes. I nodded politely. She kissed her son on the cheek and went straight into talking. She talked about neighbors, about family, about things that didn't matter. But her eyes kept flicking toward me, measuring, judging. At one point, she lowered her voice. "She's still like this?" she asked my husband. "Yes," he replied quickly. I felt something twist inside me. "She'll have to learn," his mother said. "Life doesn't slow down." I wanted to tell her that life had already slowed down for me, that I had learned more in silence than she ever had in noise. But I stayed quiet. They moved into the kitchen, and I followed slowly, keeping my head down. I listened as they talked about money, about bills, about how things were tighter now. "If things stay like this," his mother said, "you'll have to make hard choices." My husband sighed. "I know." I stood at the sink, my hands under running water, staring at the wall. The sound of water was loud in my ears, but it couldn't drown out their words. That evening, my sister came to visit again. She hugged me tightly, holding on longer than usual. I could feel her concern in the way her arms wrapped around me. She sat with me on the couch and spoke slowly. "You don't look well." I smiled weakly. She took out her phone and typed something, then turned the screen toward me. "Are you sure you're okay here?" My throat tightened. I looked toward the hallway to make sure my husband wasn't nearby. Then I shook my head slightly. She reached for my hand again and squeezed it. "You don't have to explain now," she typed. "Just know I'm here." That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I lay awake again. I stared at the ceiling and listened to the house breathe. I listened to pipes clicking, to wind brushing against the walls, to my own heart beating faster than it should. I thought about the things I had heard. Not just words, but attitudes. The way my husband spoke when he thought I couldn't hear. The way his mother treated my silence like weakness. I realized then that I wasn't just hiding my hearing. I was hiding my pain. The next few days were the hardest. Pretending became exhausting. Every nod felt heavier. Every forced smile felt fake. I started to feel angry, not at them, but at myself for staying quiet for so long. One afternoon, I heard my husband on the phone again. "She doesn't need to know everything," he said. "It'll just upset her." I stood frozen in the hallway. Upset her. Like my feelings were something to manage, not respect. That was the moment something shifted inside me. I was tired of being protected by lies. I was tired of being spoken for. I was tired of being treated like a problem that needed to be handled carefully. That evening, I went into the bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. I studied my face, my eyes, the lines that stress had carved into my skin over the past weeks. I practiced opening my mouth. I practiced saying his name out loud. The sound of my own voice surprised me. It was steady, clear, stronger than I expected. I covered my mouth quickly, afraid someone might hear. But then I lowered my hand. Why was I afraid of my own voice? Later that night, my husband sat beside me on the couch again. He placed his arm around me. The same careful gesture, the same distant comfort. I leaned into him, listening to his heartbeat. It sounded normal, too normal. I realized that while I had been changing, learning, hurting, and growing, he had stayed the same. Comfortable in my silence, comfortable in control. And I knew then that silence could no longer protect me. It had already done its job. It had shown me the truth clearly, without confusion. Now it was time for something else. Not anger, not shouting, but honesty. I didn't speak that night. I didn't speak the next day either. But inside me, the decision had already been made. Silence was no longer my shield. It was my burden. And soon, I would set it down. By the time the 5th week arrived, I could no longer bear the weight of quiet. 4 weeks of living in silence had changed me in ways I hadn't fully understood until that morning. I had been patient, careful, and observant. I had listened while others believed I could not. I had learned things about my husband and his mother that no one should ever know. I had measured my own strength, felt it grow, and realized that what I had considered weakness was only preparation. The day started like any other. I woke up before him, quietly moving through the house. I had learned to wake silently, to move without drawing attention, to exist in a space where sound once mattered and now mattered even more. I listened to the familiar morning hums, the refrigerator, the pipes, the faint wind brushing the walls, and let them ground me. When my husband appeared in the kitchen, he greeted me as usual, slow and careful, thinking I still could not hear. "Morning," he said. "Coffee ready?" I nodded, smiling faintly, and pretended to stir my tea. I watched him carefully, noticing how the corners of his mouth twitched slightly when he spoke, as if he was hiding something. That subtle expression told me more than words could. After breakfast, I sat at the dining table with a notebook in front of me. I wasn't planning to write. I was observing, cataloging. My sister had taught me to take notes, not just about events, but about emotions, inflections, and unspoken truths. I realized that over the past weeks, I had become like a shadow in my own home. Invisible, yet ever present. I knew their patterns, their moods, and their words, and now I also knew how to listen in ways they could not predict. Later that morning, my mother-in-law arrived as usual. She knocked roughly on the door, letting it swing open before I could respond. Her presence always filled the room with a kind of tension I could feel through the vibrations in the floor. She approached the kitchen and greeted my husband first, leaning in to whisper something I could not yet see. He smiled at her, nodding, and they moved into the corner to talk. I stood near the counter, pretending to prepare a snack, but I was listening. "She still doesn't notice half the things around her," his mother said in a low voice. "It's like she's not even here sometimes." He nodded. "I know. I try, but it's hard. Everything has changed." "And she can't argue back," she added, almost smugly. "It's easier this way." That last line cut deeper than anything else. I felt my hands clench around the counter edge. For weeks, I had tolerated this. I had watched it, endured it, but I had not been powerless. Not anymore. I remembered the moment my hearing returned. Just days before. The soft clink of a spoon, the running water, the subtle creak of the floor. I remembered the shock, the joy, and the fear that someone might notice. For the first time, I had felt the world in its fullness, a world of sound, a world of truth. And now, I had chosen to remain silent until I was ready to act. By mid-morning, I decided it was time. I called my sister to come over, knowing she would be a witness, someone who could validate what I was about to do. She arrived quickly, her eyes full of concern and understanding. We sat together in the living room, and I explained through notes that I could hear, that I had been listening all along. Her expression was a mix of shock and pride. "You've been so brave," she wrote on her phone and showed me. "But what are you going to do now?" I didn't answer immediately. I watched as my husband entered the room, unaware that my sister was there. He greeted me with the same gentle smile, not knowing I could hear every word, every thought, every judgment. I took a deep breath. I could feel the tension in my body like electricity. My sister squeezed my hand and nodded slightly. That small gesture gave me courage. I spoke. My voice was steady, clear, and loud enough for both of them to hear. "I can hear!" The room went completely silent. My husband froze, his mouth opening slightly, eyes wide. My mother-in-law's hand shot to her chest. Neither of them had expected it. "I can hear everything," I continued, my voice calm but firm. "Every word you've spoken, every judgment, every opinion, every secret conversation." My husband stumbled over his words. I didn't, I thought you, I raised a hand to stop him. "Don't. Just listen. Not for long, just enough for you to understand." His mother's expression changed from shock to disbelief. You're lying," she said, her voice shaking. I shook my head slowly. "No, I've been listening. I've been quiet, but not blind. Not deaf to your words, not deaf to your thoughts." I took a moment to let the weight of that sink in. The room was tense, every small sound amplified by the realization that I had been hearing everything all along. "You believed my silence meant weakness," I said, turning my gaze toward my husband. "You spoke freely as if I wasn't here, as if my feelings didn't matter. You spoke about me, my life, and my value, without knowing that I could hear every word." He swallowed hard, struggling to find an explanation. I didn't know." "You did," I said. "You just thought it was easier to pretend I couldn't hear, easier to speak the truth behind my back than to face me." My mother-in-law's face hardened. "You're overreacting," she said. I laughed softly, a sound that was sharp and controlled. "Am I? Or have I simply been patient longer than you expected? 4 weeks of silence have taught me more than you could ever imagine." My sister watched quietly, nodding. She had been my anchor, the witness to my journey. Her presence reminded me that I was not alone, that I had support, and that my words now carried power. I stood and walked toward my husband. I could feel his unease, his discomfort, and it was satisfying in a way I hadn't anticipated. Not out of revenge, but because the truth was finally being acknowledged. "You need to understand something," I said. "Silence is not weakness. Silence is observation. Silence is strength. and I've been stronger than either of you realized." He tried to speak, but I raised my hand again. "No, not yet. Listen to me first." I moved toward the window, gesturing to the rain outside. "The world doesn't stop because you think someone can't hear you. It doesn't pause because you choose convenience over honesty. You've had 4 weeks to see me as someone who needs your respect, and instead, you treated me like an inconvenience." My mother-in-law's lips trembled. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see the realization slowly dawn in her eyes. "I stayed silent because I wanted to know," I said. "I wanted to understand your true thoughts. And now I do. I know what you think of me. I know how you've treated me. And now, you will know what it feels like to be heard." My husband's face had gone pale. He tried to reach out to me, but I stepped back. "Don't touch me yet," I said. "You will earn that space back." I felt the tension in the room shift. For weeks, they had assumed I was powerless. That assumption had given them freedom. But now I was reclaiming it. My voice, which had been silent, now carried authority, and I felt every word settle like bricks in the foundation of my independence. "You will not speak about me as if I am not here," I continued, my tone unwavering. "You will not judge my life behind my back. You will not assume that my silence is ignorance, because it is not, and it never was." Tears formed in my husband's eyes, but he did not look away. He had finally realized the consequences of his words. My mother-in-law's face had hardened again, but I could see the fear behind it. She had been confident, dismissive, in control. But for the first time, that control was gone. I turned toward my sister and nodded. She smiled faintly, understanding that the words I had just spoken were not just for my husband and his mother. They were for me, too. For the weeks of pain, of watching, of learning, and of surviving. I took a deep breath. I am not the same woman who lost her hearing. I am stronger. I am aware. I am present. And from now on, I will be heard. My sister wrote something on her phone and showed it to me. "Yes?" Finally. I walked slowly toward my husband, making sure he understood the weight of my presence. "You have 4 weeks of truth inside you now," I said, "and I expect that you will carry it carefully. Because if you speak carelessly again, I will not remain silent. I will not wait. I will respond." He nodded, his face pale and humbled. "I understand," he said softly. "And you," I said, turning to his mother, "will also remember that I am here, that I hear, that I exist, and that your words are not invisible." She did not respond. She only looked away, realizing that her assumptions about me had been shattered. The rain outside had stopped. The sun began to peek through the clouds, scattering light across the room. I felt it on my face, warm and real. For the first time in weeks, I felt the full weight of my own presence. I realized then that the house felt different, not because anyone had changed entirely, but because I had. The world had returned to sound, but I had returned to myself. Stronger, clearer, unafraid. I sat back on the couch, my sister beside me, and looked at my husband. He did not speak. He simply listened, finally understanding that words have power, even when you think no one is listening. The silence was over, and in its place, something better had taken root. Truth, respect, and the knowledge that I could be heard, fully, finally, and without apology. From that day on, I knew I would never take my voice, my hearing, or my presence for granted again. I had been tested, I had endured, and I had emerged stronger than I had ever imagined. The house was no longer quiet. The air was filled with possibility, with understanding, with the weight of honesty. And I finally, fully belonged to my own life again. And that's how silence turned into power. Sometimes, patience and observation reveal the truth better than words ever could. If you enjoyed this story of courage, secrets, and revenge, thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe for more interesting revenge stories coming your way.